Good afternoon, gentle listeners. It's Erin, your librarian storyteller for the day. Welcome back to Legend and Lore, where every week I'll be telling you a handful of myths, folktales, and fairy tales that come from different cultures from all around the world, from Japan to South Africa, from Greece to Polynesia. This week I'll be regaling you with some Polynesian legends and lore, originating from the region of Oceania. Its people, known for being incredible navigators, have made their home in several other locations around the globe in the southern seas, and thus their stories also find their origins in places like Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand, which all eventually have become part of the Polynesian Triangle. Make sure you stick around for the entirety of the video because at some point I'll be giving you a keyword to enter into your summer reading account. If you participate and earn enough points through these keywords, you just might win a fabulous prize. Well, without further ado, let's get started. I find, as with all things, it's best to begin at the beginning. So I will tell you the Maui legend regarding the creation myth of the Polynesian people. Also known as the story of Rangi and Papa, or Skyfather and Earth Mother, and the Great War that resulted. Skyfather and Earth Mother, Rangi and Papa, were in love from the moment they emerged from the universe's ether, locked together in a powerfully tight embrace. From their union they had many children, 6 being godly folk, and the rest mankind, the very beginnings of mankind. However, despite their great love and great embrace, their children were troubled, for because of their tightness, their children, and because they were always pressed together, their children had no room in which to move, and no light with which to see. They only knew darkness and stillness. This troubled not only just their ability to experience and see the world that their parents were responsible for, but also interfered with their ability and mankind's ability to grow and to thrive and to make better. As a result, the 6 sons of Rangi and Papa communed with each other, consulted, and finally decided that they could only had one of 2 options for the problem of their parents. They must either slay them or separate them forcibly. Out of all their children, the fiercest of them, Tumatuenga, the god of war and mankind, was the only one brave enough to suggest that they should separate their parents in order to spare them further agony. But Tane Mahuta, the god of forest and birds, refused this and said, No, that is not necessary. We can do better than that. We will simply separate them. We will push them apart, and Rangi will be abandoned to the heavens with which he symbolizes, and Papa will return, our single parent, our only nourisher and protector, and all will be well. Reluctantly, Tumatuenga acquiesced, and the other brothers did as well, all except Tawiri Mati, the god of winds and storms, but we'll get to him in a little while. Regardless, the brothers decided to enact their plan. Rongo Matane, the god of cultivated food, went first. With his feet planted firmly on his mother and his hands pushed firmly against his father, he pushed and pushed and pushed as hard as he possibly could, but to no avail. His parents would not be separated. Next, Tangora, the god of the sea, tried his luck. Echoing his brother's attempts, he too pushed and pushed with all of his might against his mighty father. But there was no change. Finally, Haumea Tikitiki, the god of wild and uncultivated food, tried his hand, but just as his brothers before him, the results were the same. His parents could not be split apart. Finally, Tane Mahuta tried his hand at this, for it had been his idea in the beginning. But instead of echoing his brother's strategies, he instead employed one of his own. He lay with his back pressed against his mother, and his legs pushed up against his father. His mighty legs which were as powerful as the grand forest which he ruled over. Pushed and pushed, tendons strained, branches snapped, but still they went, growing out of the earth like the grandest of trees could ever imagine, pushing against the very heavens. Until finally, with an almighty cry, not from Tane Mahuta, but from Papa and Rangi, one of sorrow and great grief, the 2 were absolutely rent apart. Rangi being thrown up into the heavens, only able to gaze down at beloved Papa below him. And light flooded the world. For the first time, the six brothers could see the world their parents had laid upon, and it was beautiful. And they could also see the beginnings of mankind blinking in the bright light, ready to take on the world and make it their own. And all was well, except it wasn't. But Tawiri Mati, the god of winds and storms, had a great allegiance to his father, and could not bear the heartbreak of seeing his parents separated, the tears that poured down Rangi's face as he looked down upon Papa, away and out of his reach. He swore against his brothers that they would pay for the pain that they had caused their parents. And thus he went away with Rangi and stayed there, fostering his own children, mighty and grand that they were. The four winds, each thrust to the four corners of the earth, north, south, east, west, and clouds of every kind. Fierce squalls, whirlwinds, gloomy thick clouds, fiery clouds, hurricane clouds, thunderstorm clouds, rain, mists, and fog. And very soon, Tawiri Mati had an army at his disposal, which he would bring to bear against his brothers. The first he went after was Tane Mahuta, the god of forest and birds. The winds would blow, roaring and tearing, dust filled in the air, and trees were uprooted and ripped from the very earth, tossed and smashed across the earth, the food that they carried being left to rot and feed the insects. Next, he went after Tangora, the god of the sea, who as the whirlwinds and whirlpools and waves grew in strength, Tangora fled in absolute fear. His child, Punga, the god of sharks and all strange creatures of the deep, also fled, but Punga's children, Ikitere, the god of fish, and Tutawahiwahi, the god of lizards, also fled, but in different ways. Ikitere fled into the sea, Tutawahiwahi fled into the forest, given shelter by Tane Mahuta. Even when there's a war on with one brother, seems other brothers can't help but hold grudges. And Tangora and Tane Muta, feeling not exactly pleased by the sheltering of one's grandchild by the other, are still locked into this bitter feud. Tane Mahuta supplies mankind with canoes, fishhooks, and nets to catch the descendants of Tangora, while Tangora retaliates by swamping canoes, sweeping away houses, land, and trees that are washed out to sea in floods. But back to Tawiri Mati. He now went in search of his brothers Rongo Matane, the god of cultivated food, and Haumia Tiki Tiki, the god of wild and uncultivated food. But Papa, Mother Earth as she was, wanted to spare as many children as she could as possible. In this case, she was already too late to save some of them, but she thought if she could save Rongo and Haumia, she would be able to preserve the line of mankind that would continue onwards. So, taking the two brothers to her breast, she hid them beneath her bosom, deep in the earth, where Tawiri Mati could not find them. So, with only one brother left to face, Tawiri Mati set his sights onto Matoanga, the god of war and mankind, the fiercest of them all. But blow and push as he might, Tawiri Mati could not best his brother, for Tumatuanga stood tall and strong and endured amongst the mighty storm. And when one saw that they could not fell the other, there was peace once more. Except there wasn't. Tumatuanga was furious. Not really truly at his brother Tawiri Mati, but at his other brothers. One, for abandoning him to face Tawiri Mati on his own, and also for the naive decision that had started this whole business. If Rangi and Papa had simply been slain, all of this would not have happened. Their anguish, the resulting war, and all the many deaths that followed. So, he decided he would have revenge. He made snares and caught birds out of the sky, the children of Tane Mahuta, so they could no longer fly free. He created nets and tossed them into the sea to collect the children of Tangora, the fish and the creatures within, and threw them up on the shore to be collected. Finally, he created hoes to dig out Rongo Matiane and Haumia Tiki Tiki from where they hid, pulling them up by their plant-like hair, and again tossing them into baskets to be collected. Thus it was that Tumatuanga ate all of his brothers, except for Tawiri Mati, so that they would be supplicant to mankind, cultivated and collected for their strength alone, both for their cowardice and for the sustenance of mankind to follow forward. Tawiri Mati, who could not be fallen, is the only one who still remains to combat Tumatuanga. And still, the battle still continues in a way, for mankind grows and mankind thrives, but when the storms come, they must endure, or else be be swept away. And that is the first story that I have for you, gentle listeners, but it's not the last one. Next, we're going to be moving to Hawaii, or as I better said, the origins of Hawaii. Now, there are many stories regarding this, many variations, but the one I'm going to tell you is of the goddess Pele, the goddess of fire and volcanoes, and how she came to create Hawaii as it was. It all begins with a journey. For Pele, as a mortal woman, came to Hawaii, as many do, by canoe. The reasons for her journey are various. Some say that her husband abandoned her and she went in search of him. More popular ones say that she was being chased by her sister, Namakau-Kahai, an ocean goddess. Whether because Pele herself seduced her husband, or because Pele was simply too fiery to contain. No one truly knows. But Namakau-Kahai was a fierce woman, a fierce creature of herself, and would not let her sister be. So Pele went onwards, fleeing with her brothers and a small egg which contained her yet unborn baby sister. Pele escaped in a double-hulled canoe and fled north. But her older sister was in hot pursuit. All the way they would travel, all the way up to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, and then to Niihau, and finally work their way down the chain to Hawaii Island. Every island they stopped at, Pele would dig a fire pit in order to build a home. And every time she did so, Namakau-Kahai would arrive and douse the flames, extinguishing everything that Pele had built and chasing her off. Each island that they left was left smoldering, but remained strong. But still, Pele was in desperate search of a safe home. Onwards and onwards they go, until Pele finally reached Maui, and she built her home high up on Halaiki, in a cinder cone named Puopele, the Hill of Pele. The volcano was so vast and so big, and so very active, that it was far beyond Namakau-Kahai's reach. But one day Pele got a little impatient and descended into Hana. Whether for supplies, for a change of pace, no one knows. But when she did so, her sister was there waiting for her. What resulted was a terrible battle. Fire against water, most certainly, but still, mortal against immortal. And the end, well, was obvious of how it was going to end. A battle took place, and Namakau-Kahai tore Pele apart. Where her bones lay is called Kaiwaio Pele, known as the Bones of Pele, a real place in Hawaii today. And as she died, and her bones scattered some say her bones were scattered. Her bones, some say, even formed the islands themselves in some variation. But from her death, Pele rose again, this time in the form of a goddess of fire and bursting lava, and traveled in her new spirit form to the Big Island, where her home is to this day. Now, Namakau-Kahai thought that at first her sister was vanquished, and she was quite pleased. But when she saw the smoke emerging from Hawaii's island and understood that Pele was now a goddess like herself, well, their battle continued in a way. Pele's magna pours from the volcanoes and creates land, while Namakau-Kahai still waits in the ocean, just daring her sister to take a step. Some say that Pele's death and eventual rebirth is a story of coming of age, from girlhood to womanhood, from mortal to immortal. It all depends on your perspective. But what remains is this. Namakau-Kahai is the ocean, and Pele is the land. And when the two meet, explosions in the form of volcanoes. There are many stories regarding Pele and her powerful and fiery temper, as well as her gentle kindness. But those are tales from another time. And as promised, I now have a keyword to give you. The keyword today is actually the place where Pele met her end. Kaiwaio Pele, all capitals. Kaiwiopele. Kaiwaio Pele, the place where the goddess was born. I still have one more story to tell you, gentle listeners, and this one I think you'll know most of all, or at least some variations of it, because it is a story that has been Disneyfied by the best of them in the movie Moana. That's right, I'm going to tell you the story Maui. Now, there are many variations of Maui within different tribes and different cultures in the greater whole of Polynesia. There are Hawaii versions, there are New Zealand versions, there are Maori versions. I'm going to be telling you the Maori version, and it is by far the oldest. But again, Maui himself was not a god, but a demigod. He is not worshipped, he is not revered, he is spoken of with joy, respect, mischief, and occasionally caution. He brought many gifts to mankind, served them as best he could, and in his final act for mankind, it is how he met his end. But first off, let me tell you a little bit of Maui's origins. The son of Tauranga, who was the wife of Makatuatara, a god of the underworld, had a rather unusual birth. He was born premature, and as a result, his mother threw him into the sea. However, he survived and was raised by his grandfather into adolescence. When he became a little old enough, still a baby truly, but old enough to understand where he had come from, he sought to reunite with his family. Traveling and onwards, he traveled to his family home, a great island of assembly where his family and the people around him, relatives, would dance, making merry best as he could. He crept in amongst the dancers and sat down behind four boys who he knew were his brothers, as well as a young girl who was also his sister. Tauranga called forth her children and found little Maui, who she did not recognize, among them. She attempted to cast him from the house, but he would not go, and Tauranga's anger started to grow, until finally she erupted in such a way. Come, you, be off now, out of the house at once. You are no child of mine. You belong to someone else. Little Maui spoke out quite boldly and said, Very well, I'd better be off then, for I suppose, as you say it, I must be the child of some other person. But indeed, I did believe I was your child when I said so, because I know I was born at the side of the sea, and was thrown by you into the foam of the surf, after you had wrapped me in the tuft of your hair, which you cut off for this very purpose. The seaweed then formed and fashioned me, as caught me in its long tangles, and the ever-heaving surges of the sea rolled me, folded me as if I was in them, from side to side, at length, and breezes and squalls which blew from the ocean drifted me onto shore again, and the soft jellyfish of the long sandy beaches rolled themselves round me to protect me. Myriads of flies alighted to me to buzz about and lay their eggs. Their maggots might eat me, and flocks of birds collected round to peck me to pieces. But it was at that moment appeared my grandfather, Tamanui ki te Rangi, and he saw the flies, and he saw the birds, and he saw the jellyfish, and he saw a small child coalesced in the center of it. And as he pushed it all off me, he caught me up and carried me to his home, where he hung me in the roof that I might feel the warm smoke and the heat of the fire. And so I was saved alive by that kindness of that old man. And at last I grew, and I heard of the fame of the dancing of this great house of assembly, and it was by that which brought me here. But from the time I was in your womb, I have heard the names of those your firstborn children, and as you have been calling to them over and over until this very night, when I again heard you repeating them. In proof of this, I will now recite the names of to you, my brothers. And he pointed at his first brother. You are Maui Taha. At his second, you are Maui Roto. At his third, you are Maui Pe. At the fourth, and you are Maui Waho. And then he pointed to his sister. And you, dear sister, are Hina. And as for me, I am little Maui the baby, and here I am, sitting before you. When his mother, Taranga, heard all of this, she cried out, You dear little child, you are indeed my last born, the son of my old age, and therefore I tell you now, your name shall be Maui Tiki Tiki, or Maui formed in the top knot. And he was forever called by that name. Maui went on to accomplish many great deeds. One of many was the slowing of the sun. In the days of old, the sun used to travel very fast across the sky. There was not enough time in the daylight left for mankind to work and to eat and to make merry. Every moment was spent trying to catch the last blinkings of light, and every day they failed. Maui decided this could not be, and was set out and was determined to catch the sun and slow it down. He tried to convince his brothers of this, but they said to him, You are the youngest of us, you are the weakest of it, and the sun is a great mighty creature, full of heat and rage. Who are you to attempt such a feat? And Maui stood tall and said to them, My dear brothers, do not doubt me, do not doubt the power I have. I am not just a man, I am a shapeshifter. And he went to prove himself. He took on the appearance of bird and beast and fish alike, moving between forms with such ease. Because of these many forms, I have a new point of view. I have many powers at my disposal, and from these many forms I have learned many lessons. And I know that with your help, I will be able to attain such a goal. His brothers were convinced, and so they worked together. Maui went forward, armed with the jawbone of Murray Anga Wanua, his grandmother, and a large amount of rope tied into many different knots. Some say made from his sister Hina's hair. Maui and his brothers went forth and found the pit where the sun god Tamanui Tara slept during the nighttime. They tied the ropes into many different knots, many of the knots which are still used today, finally forming a noose around the pit, and built a wall of clay in order to shelter them from the heat. When Tamanui Tara awoke from his slumber and made to begin his daily journey, however fast it may be, Maui and his brothers pulled tightly to the rope, and the noose tightened around the sun god. And try as he struggled, Tamanui Tira could not escape and could not lift into the sky. And as he was flung down onto the earth, Maui stepped up and beat him so strongly with the jawbone that would later be known as his great fishhook, until the sun surrendered and agreed that from that day forward, the sun would move much slower across the sky in order to give mankind the chance to thrive. That is not the last of Maui's many accomplishments. In New Zealand tradition, it is also said that he is responsible for creating the North Island, possibly even the South Island. It begins like this. Maui's brothers, despite loving their little brother, were still often jealous of him, and perhaps arrogant in their older age. They always refused that he could fish with them. But Maui was a mischievous sort and would not take no for an answer. One day he wove for himself a flax fishing line and enchanted it to give it strength. To this he attached the magic fishhook that was made from the jawbone of his grandmother and stowed away in the hull of his brother's canoe. The next morning, when the canoes had made their way out to sea and were far too far away in order to turn back, he came out from his hiding hole. His brothers acquiesced for him coming along, but they refused to give him any bait to fish with. So Maui pouted as they started their work. But he did not pout for long, because he had an idea. He ended up striking himself on the nose, and with the blood that poured from it, he baited his fish hook. He tossed the hook into the water, held onto the rope, and waited. Before too long, there was a tug at the rope, and Maui pulled. He pulled and he pulled and he pulled with all his absolute strength until finally an enormous fish known as Hahawahuna emerged from the depths. So great was this fish that to this day it's considered the North Island of New Zealand, which calls itself Taika a Maui, the fish of Maui. There's even some to say that in his might, when Maui was pulling with all his strength to bring the fish out of the ocean, that the imprint that he left behind on the canoe which he stood for was so great that the canoe itself became the southern island of New Zealand. This is occasionally contradicted by other stories that say that about the South Island's origin, which predate Maui's exploits, but it is still an amusing story. Regardless, when the North Island fish was pulled from the water, Maui left to find herbs and the proper procedures in order to have a ceremony and prayers before cutting it up. But his brothers were impatient. They cut up the fish, and as it writhed in agony, it broke up into mountains, cliffs, and valleys. When Maui returned, he was furious. If his brothers had only waited, they would know that the island would have been calm and flat, making the people who would eventually come to live on it a much easier time in crossing its surface. However, because of his brothers' impatience, the result was that New Zealand, the northern island of New Zealand, is a madhouse of different environmental landmarks that make it very difficult to cross. Many stories followed. Maui would bring fire to the world. Maui would create the first dog. Maui would bring coconuts. Onwards and onwards the stories would go. But there's one that ended in a story of caution. For Maui, despite all his mischief, despite all his many deeds, was not a true god. He was a demigod. And thus he was susceptible to foolishness and to death. And it was during this last exploit that he eventually met his end. After all his many feats, Maui decided that he was ready to win immortality for mankind. There would be no more need for death, no more need for sorrow, and people would be able to live forever. He went to his father to tell him of his plans. Maka Atutara, who, as I said, was a god of the underworld, tried to dissuade him. Whether because he thought Maui's plans were foolish, or because his father himself had made a mistake upon his initial baptism. He told his son, "You are brave, and you have done much, but I am still certain that there is someone who will be your end." Maui was curious. "Who do you say this would be?" "Your ancestress, Hine Nui Tepo, the goddess of the night. She is there upon the horizon." Maui was incredulous about this. "She cannot be as strong as the sun. I trapped him and beat him. Is she greater than the sea from which I pulled the islands? Greater than the lands? I have done so many things. Now let us see whether or not I will succeed or whether I will fail." His father, sadly, nodded his head and said, "You will do as you do, my son. Simply be careful. Go, find your ancestress who lives at the side of the sky." "But how will I recognize her? The red flashing in the western sky comes from her. Her body is like a human, but she is enormous, and her eyes are the colors of greenstone, her hair sea kelp, and her mouth is like a barracuda's mouth." But Maui could not be, despite this description, Maui was not daunted. He went westward. Some say that his companions were birds. Others say his companions were his brothers. Regardless, at the end of his travels, he found Hine, asleep with her legs spread, And, well, Maui could see another reason why his father had been worried. For between her legs, he could see sharp flints, sharp teeth of pure obsidian and greenstone. Maui turned to his friends, or his brothers, depending on who you ask, and said, I must go into her body. I must prove that I can emerge from such a thing, and when I come out again, I will have the secret of immortality. But as I enter this body, you must not make a sound. You must not laugh. Wait until I exit from her mouth, and then you may laugh as much as you like. His companions, his friends, or his brothers, depending on who you ask, all shouted out, You will die! There is no way you can survive this. If you make a noise, Maui said, then I surely will die. But if I am able to pass through her body, then I will live, and she will be the one who dies, and I will have overcome mortality in all its many rungs. So Maui readied himself. He threw off his clothes, took the cord of his battle club between his wrist and jumped into the water. He swam over to where Hine lay to rest, and he began. Diving down beneath her thighs, he entered her body. Now, this part of the story is where it gets a little inaccurate. Some say that the birds or his brothers were able to hold on to their laughter until Maui had reached her head and almost had exited her mouth. Others say that they were not able to contain it even that long, and while Maui was still making his way entering her body between her thighs, they let out chortles, laughter, screeching and loud. And when Hine awoke, she opened her eyes and either bit down her head teeth and snapped Maui in two, or clamped her legs together, which resulted in the same. Either way, she was awake, and Maui was dead. And Maui was the first to die, because he had failed his task. And as a result, all human beings from then on were mortal. And that is the end of Maui. Many accomplishments did he succeed at, but the inevitable he did fail. That is all I have for you today, gentle listeners. Tune in next time for the next dive into culture that we go upon. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. And I shall see you very soon. Please be well. Goodbye.